In Acts 17:11 we read, "These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the Scriptures daily, whether those things were so." So without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
This is a re-recording of Devotional number 400, first aired on February 2nd, 2018. We have been looking this week at the subject, the biblical principles for child rearing. And today I'd like us to focus in on teenagers, especially. If you are a parent, and have teenagers or have had teenagers, you'll recognize that they can be both a blessing and a trial. It is actually a formative time in which the children seem to question just about everything. More than ever, however, communication becomes essential. And the older the teen, the greater the need for personal communication. Deuteronomy 6:7 bears repeating. "And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." Teens are also becoming more independent, and with such independence, there needs to be a greater responsibility and accountability within clearly defined boundaries. 1 Timothy 4:12 is an exhortation for both teen and parent alike. "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation or lifestyle, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." They also need to hear the following admonition that we read in Ecclesiastes 11:9 through 10. "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh. For childhood and youth are vanity." I remember it was during this stage that two of my older teens asked my wife and I if they could be homeschooled to give them opportunities to go on some of the mission trips overseas as well as domestically. We did give our consent, and I believe the Lord used those trips to will and to do of His good pleasure in their lives. Psalm 144:12 is a reminder to me of what all Christian parents pray and long for, but does not always take place, namely the salvation of their children during the day of salvation. But if it did occur, all credit must go to God for orchestrating this. And even in our current day of judgment, we truly don't know if there's no evidence that God has done a work in one of our children's lives. And so we can continue to pray and beseech God that, having had mercy, might He continue to have mercy. We read in Psalm 144:12 that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace. Throughout this study, I've often repeated the necessity of prayer for our children because they are such important parts of our lives. And a parent realizes early on how utterly he or she is dependent upon the Lord to be the kind of parent that God would have us to be. This is also the case as we read in Hebrews 12, 5 through 11, which is a beautiful description of the difference between a parent's discipline and God's perfect, holy, and righteous discipline. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh, which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? Pardon me. For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. Without a doubt, the greatest lesson our children will learn will be to follow not so much what we say, but rather what we do. This is the overwhelmingly profound influence of example. Consider the words of James 1:22-25. But be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and this would be the Bible, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. 2 Timothy 1:5 highlights this heavenly truth as well. And Paul here in the context is speaking to Timotheus, his young protege. When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice. And I am persuaded that in thee also. Genesis 26:34-35 describes an account familiar to many a Christian family. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. If any of our children do or have become a true child of God, it is only by the mercy of God. But whatever happens, we can rest in the knowledge that God does all things well, according to Mark 7:37. Psalm 127:1 is a magnificent tribute to God's constant faithfulness. Except Jehovah build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except Jehovah keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain.